Risk analysis and management have become much more important in the food industry now that the Food Safety and Modernization Act has mandated that we have risk-based controls in place to make our food supply safer. So let's take a look at what risk analysis and management means in terms of the food industry. We'll start by defining risk. Risk is the probability that something is going to go wrong with your food, which could be making people sick, in a recall, or it could be that the quality is lower that you wanted, or it could be deciding to make a new food product and then realizing that, hey, this doesn't sell the way we thought it would, so we're losing money. And that probability that something that's going to go wrong is combined with what happens when it does go wrong. So maybe you do have a recall, or you have to destroy a lot of food product because it's contaminated. Or, on the less serious side, you thought you were going to make a very nice high quality product like we see over here with these little pumpkins, and it comes out to be something that is not quite so high quality looking. These little guys down at the bottom may be perfectly tasty, but they don't look that great, and now with social media being what it is, any mistake you make gets posted to social media and spread all over the place very quickly. So there's the risk there of both embarrassment to yourself and, more importantly, loss of reputation to your company, loss of money, and a general decrease of the ability to do business. So now that we've defined risk, let's talk about risk analysis. Risk analysis involves identifying any threats associated with a product or a process and an estimation of the risk, which is a combination of probability and cost. So if we take a look at the potato salad right here as our product, the threat we have from this usually is some kind of pathogen concern. Potato salad is basically a petri dish for things that will make you very miserable for 24 to 72 hours. So if this potato salad is in a random grocery store container on the break room table and I walk in and I say, ooh, potato salad, and I want to eat some, but I don't know how long it's been sitting there. It may have been there for 15 minutes, it may have been there for 4 hours. I am taking the risk that this potato salad will give me a couple of miserable days. Or it could not do that. So I have to do a risk analysis and say, do I want to take the chance of eating this potato salad? Maybe it won't make me sick, maybe it's totally fine, but there's also the risk that that potato salad is not freely available for me to eat. Maybe my coworker was planning to eat that for lunch, left it on the table, and wandered off to go get something. And if I start eating his lunch, he's going to come back and say, what are you doing? And then I have an issue with coworker relations. So there's the risk of that as well. When you analyze risk, you have to realize, okay, should I do this now? Is this something that is of enough concern that I need to do a full risk analysis? And there are some things to keep in mind of when, yes, the full risk analysis process is a good idea. The first is a decision about new product or processes. Should you start this new product? Should you invest in a new process or not? How much risk is there in terms of money spent, time spent, personnel labor costs, the potential to make money versus lose money? All of those factor into that decision. Another time where you should perform a full risk analysis is when you have a new product or process that you're going to implement. So you've already made the decision that, yes, I want to do this. But then you have to decide, okay, what are the risks inherent to this product? Is it likely to grow pathogens? Is it likely to have bits of metal in it? Is it likely to sell well to the target market? Is there a target market for it, or do we need to find one? With this process, are there steps in the process that are dangerous to humans? Does it involve high temperatures, high pressures, sharp objects, rotating objects, things that could hurt people? So you have to do a risk analysis there to make sure that the risk is low enough that you say, yes, I do want to go forward with this particular product or process. If you're making a change to an existing product or process, you need to redo your risk analysis, because let's say you have that potato salad and now you put another ingredient into it. Well, that other ingredient may shift the composition of your potato salad towards something that is more favorable for microbial growth, and that increases your risk. If you make a process change, let's say you put in a recycle loop for your processed water. Well, what does that do to your processed water? Does it change the chemical balance? Does it shift the microbial load? Does it change the temperature to anything? What happens to it? If you have an upcoming event, you need to do a risk analysis. And this is not always food related, but food companies do have to think about events. So an upcoming event that is food related may be a new product launch. What's your risk there? Well, you may have a competitor that's launching a similar product at the same time. Or you may have other factors that affect that launch. So you have to think about all those things that could potentially impact your product launch and see what risks are in there that may hurt that launch that I'm planning. And finally, if you have any organizational changes, you need to do a risk analysis. So if you're hiring people or firing people or reorganizing the company or considering a merger, you need a risk analysis to say, okay, what happens when I have basically personnel shifting, talent shifting, new people moving in or out? What are the risks there in terms of knowledge, intellectual property, capital, space, locations? All of that needs to be thought about. And once you have analyzed your risk, then you need to think about, okay, I know there's risk here associated with this particular process, product, event, change, what have you. How am I going to manage that risk to the point where it's something that I'm comfortable dealing with? So risk management looks at eliminating risk if possible, but it's not always possible to eliminate risk. So for example, these pictures down here, we're doing microbial and metal detection testing in foods because it's not possible to eliminate all contamination in foods. It's going to be there even if it's there at a low level. So if you know your risk is going to happen, how you manage it is that you lower the probability that it occurs and you lower the consequences of that particular event occurring. So let's take a look at how to manage it. The first thing you do, avoid it. If you could, at all possible, get this risk out of there. So this is a lot of the times why you have things like blade guards on power saws and cutters and things like that. It's so you can't actually physically get your hand or whatever other object into the way of this very, very sharp blade and hurt yourself. So you are avoiding that risk because you actually can't get your hand close enough that you do have a risk to being cut. But it's not always possible to avoid risk. Again, in food products, there's just a lot that can go wrong, and we can't avoid all of it unless we basically create tasteless mush in a can, and nobody wants to eat that. So instead of totally avoiding it, we do a couple of other things. The first thing we can do is share that risk. And so a good example of this is hurdle technology in fermented and canned foods. So let's think about fermented pickles. You have salt in there, you have sugar, you have spices that have antimicrobial properties. You add microorganisms that add acid. Those microorganisms may also have antimicrobial properties aside from the acid production. You heat the product once it's fully fermented to kill off anything that might have gotten in there somehow. You have a hermetic seal on your can so nothing can get in afterward. And so all of those hurdles share that risk out. So even if one of them fails, the other ones can still be there managing the risk of any kind of microbial contamination, and you still have a safe product. But sometimes it's not possible to avoid or share the risk. And so in that case, you just have to accept that yes, there is a risk there and deal with it appropriately. And so in foods, we have quality management plans to see, okay, where is this risk and how can we, knowing that that risk is there, deal with it appropriately to get it as low as possible, even if we can't completely eliminate it. That includes preventative measures, especially the new HARP-C program, which is an updated version of HACCP, and the RPC and HARP-C, that is risk-based preventative controls. So we are paying more attention now in the food industry to risk. What is it? How can we prevent it or at least reduce it to a tolerable level? Another thing we can do if we know we're going to have risk in there, monitoring testing. So that's your QA department. They are looking for things that go wrong. And through that monitoring and through the testing, we can catch the risk as it occurs, so we can do an immediate corrective action and we don't release unsafe product to the public. And then finally, we can do internal, external audits. So we can check our procedures that we have and see, are they actually working? You know, we say, okay, this risk is here and we're dealing with it, but is that actually effective? So we are checking ourselves to make sure that our controls are doing what they're supposed to do and we are managing our risk appropriately. So let me give you an example of risk analysis and management in my own life. I have food allergies, and one of those allergies is peanuts. And so when I eat peanuts, I get a rather spectacular rash that is extremely itchy, and it takes about a week to go away. And I don't get anaphylactic shock, but this is a very uncomfortable thing to have happen, and so I want to avoid peanuts if all possible. So whenever I eat food, I have to do a very quick risk analysis into what is my risk of accidentally ingesting peanuts with this food. And so when I do that risk, I combine it with management to reduce the risk as much as possible. The first step in risk management, I buy pretty much all of the food I eat. I check the labels on the food. So when I'm going through the grocery store and I'm going through an aisle like this, I flip the back of that package over and I say, does it contain peanuts or not? You know, even peanut oil or peanut flour, I don't want that in my food because it may give me an allergic reaction. I don't want that to happen. So that's one thing I do to manage the risk. Another thing I do to manage risk is cook almost all of my own food. I buy very little pre-packaged, ready-to-eat meals. I cook it from scratch. That means I have control over the ingredients and what goes into this food. If I have a recipe that calls for peanuts, I can substitute with something else and manage my risk of eating peanuts that way. But sometimes I get invited out to dinner and I go to a restaurant and I don't have control over what's going on in that kitchen. So if I am in a restaurant setting, I ask lots of questions, and I'm sure there are plenty of servers who are very annoyed at this person that is staring up at them asking all kinds of questions about, okay, well, what's in this sauce, and what's in this product, and what's in this particular dish, and can this get substituted? But by asking those questions and reading the menu very carefully and letting them know that, hey, I have a peanut allergy, and I'm not going to swell up and die, but I really do not want to eat this food and get this allergic reaction, then I lower my risk that way because they are on the lookout that, oh, this person can't have peanuts, we got to be careful, and I know to some extent what is in the food. Now, I can't completely eliminate the risk of eating peanuts, but by doing these things, I can certainly manage my risk, and so far, it's been well over 6 years since I had a reaction to peanuts, and that means that my risk management plan is working pretty well. I just have to keep vigilant and make sure I am doing risk analysis and management on a regular basis so I don't ingest peanuts in the future. And that's true of all food products. Whether you're worried about an allergen or some kind of hazard through chemical or microbial or physical means, you have to constantly be thinking, okay, what could get into this particular product? Sometimes you want to do a full quantitative risk analysis and say, okay, what are the hazards with this food? But you always do want to have that management plan in place so that you can be sure that you're creating a safe food product while at the same time making sure it tastes good and making sure that it is profitable for you as a food producer.